The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mohamed Bazoum, President of the Republic of Niger. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Mohamed Bazoum, President of the Republic of the Niger, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegations, representatives of international organizations, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, first of all, allow me to address to you my warm congratulations, and I wish you every success on your outstanding election to the presidency of the 77th regular session of the General Assembly of the United Nations Organization. I would like to salute the leadership and commitment of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for peace and for development, for climate action, and for overcoming, mastering the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as his sustained efforts to find solutions to various areas of tension throughout the world. Mr. President, we are in the decade of action for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and the climate emergency is creating humanitarian needs at the same time as we are seeing an exacerbation of the development situation that has already existed for a long time. Alarming news is coming from the intergovernmental experts on climate change, showing that major tipping points and irreversible climate changes have perhaps been already reached or even exceeded. Due to climate disruption, the African continent is being exposed to a worsening of food insecurity, to the displacement of populations, to recurring droughts, and to pressures on water resources. Given the urgency of this situation, I am happy to see that during the special high-level dialogue on the Africa we want, organized on the 20th of July 2022 under the auspices of the United Nations, the international community recognized that COP27, scheduled for this November in Egypt, will be a unique opportunity to redress this imbalance. In this regard, I would like to express the commitment of Niger to the proposal of the African negotiators for a new goal of $1.3 billion by 2025 in order to help us better face climate changes. In the Sahel, the geographic area to which my country belongs, climate change negatively affects farming and pastoral activities as well as affecting water resources, and is also the cause for extreme droughts, torrential rainfall sometimes, as well as an increase in temperatures above the global average. This is why Niger pays particular attention to the African initiative, the Great Green Wall, which is part of the 2063 agenda of the African Union. Mr. President, with regard to the security situation in my country, well, the situation in the Sahel has gotten worse in recent years. This is particularly the case for Niger, given the unfavorable regional situation. If you remember, it all began with the fall in 2011 of the Libyan regime, and to date it has never been able to be replaced by a stable government that has been able to exercise authority throughout the country. Also, the vast territory in the south of Libya has become a platform for transnational organized crime, where we see a blossoming of trafficking in arms, drugs, fuel, and migrants, leading to structural insecurity throughout the countries of the Sahel and its neighborhood. Mali, which succumbed in 2011 to the generalized violence coming from Libya has never really been able to recover. It has, in its turn, become a breeding ground for terrorism, which is characteristic of the Sahel, extremely affected by the effects of climate change, threatening the practice of pastoral farming. This ecosystem of violence has experienced a bonanza amongst young shepherds of the communities affected by climate change, and very many of them have turned to terrorism. In the north of Mali, this scourge is also spreading towards Niger, Burkina Faso, and is now threatening to extend to the Gulf of Guinea. This violence has such potential for destabilizing state institutions that it has led to the fall of democratically elected governments in Mali and Burkina Faso, respectively, in 2020 and 2022. Niger, my country, in addition to this terrorist threat on our three borders, is facing another terrorist threat in the Lake Chad Basin, where we see the various groups of the nebulous organization Boko Haram operating. Mr. President, despite the constraints that I have mentioned, my country is showing great resilience based on wise governance, promoting a culture of tolerance and cohesion between communities, as well as promoting the rules of democracy and the rule of law. It is this option in favor of freedom that has made it possible for us to organize transparent elections and led to the first change in the head of state, where a democratically elected president handed over power to another president elected under the same conditions in April 2021. Our experience in Niger has shown us, as if this were necessary, that the best way to ward off the effects of terrorist violence is to strengthen the democratic system and nothing else. The war against terrorism means that we have to currently allocate significant resources to increase the number of our forces, to acquire appropriate equipment, and to strengthen the capacity of our soldiers. Allow me to take this opportunity, Mr. President, to thank our various partners that are committed with us in this fight against terrorism. I would particularly like to thank France. Their action through Operation Barkhane represents a major asset in the balance of forces vis-à-vis our enemy. I would also like to thank the United States of America, the Federal Republic of Germany, as well as the other countries that are working alongside us in various ways, all of them equally helpful. Mr. President, nevertheless, I feel that we must stress here that the commitment of the international community in fighting terrorism in the Sahel still shows great gaps which should be identified and addressed. Indeed, this terrorism draws a lot of its financing from the trans-Saharan trafficking in drugs towards Europe and Asia via Libya. The majority of the weapons that are flooding the market for terrorist violence in the Sahel also come from Libya. It seems to me that in this particular case we are facing a problem that is not particularly complicated. Why, then, has it not been possible to put in place an adequate system with the necessary funding in order to appropriately fight this phenomenon? Indeed, it is high time, Mr. President, that our collective thinking of the great powers represented in this region, as well as the international community, work together with us, the countries of this region, so that together we can start thinking in a much more focused way about how we can define action that will be effective in fighting drug trafficking and arms trafficking in the Sahel. Mr. President, despite the great challenges that we face, as described above, Niger remains a robust and stable state, underpinned by democratic institutions, resolutely committed to the fight against poverty and in favor of development. Our deep conviction in this regard is that the genuinely most effective way to fight poverty is by promoting the educational system. The development challenges for Niger can be summed up by the following simple figures: an annual population growth rate of 3.9%, an average fertility rate of, on average, 7 children per woman, the first pregnancy for around 50% of girls before the age of 15 years, with half the population being around 15 years old. These statistics tell you a lot about the failure of our education system, and that is why we are committed to act resolutely in order to improve matters. Also, the program for which we have been elected by the people of Niger is to act to improve access to education as well as the quality of education. With regard to quality, we have decided to stress in particular the quality of teacher training and to make the job of teaching much more professional. With regard to improving access, our policy stresses the building of school infrastructure. Another aspect which is particularly important that I would like to stress as part of our educational program is gender equality and building boarding schools for girls in rural areas. Given the situation in rural areas where pupils are a long way away from their parents, sometimes it stops girls pursuing their education. And very often when they leave education, they are married off, and not included in some of the statistics I mentioned earlier on. Boarding schools give them peace and quiet and security and the conditions to continue their studies with the possibility to stay at the school and to acquire academic and vocational skills that they will need there. The scaling up of boarding arrangements in rural schools, whilst contributing to improving the performance of the educational system, also helps to reduce the rate of population growth. Mr. President, the reason why I have stressed our educational policy, after having spoken about climate change, terrorism, and lack of security in the Sahel, I did this because these three issues, demography, insecurity, and terrorism, are very much linked. Terrorism operating the Sahel today is linked to the living conditions for certain communities where the environment has been significantly affected by climate change. The Sahel, moreover, in recent decades is an area that has seen a particularly high spike in population growth. These two phenomena combined, population growth and the worsening of the environment combined, have led to regional disorder following the collapse of the Gaddafi regime in 2011, and has contributed to the chaotic situation being experienced by countries in the region. This is why, for the United Nations and for the international community, becoming emotional and speaking about terrorist violence will not be enough. We have to act by investing in the resources that we need in education in order to fight the violence of today and prevent the violence of tomorrow. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of the Niger for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Adama Barrow,